and welcome to La Rosa Reads. I'm Denise La Rosa, and today I'm going to travel down memory lane and share the books that I fell in love with before I became a member of BookTube. Let's talk books. So I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I began my BookTube journey in November of 2021. And prior to that, I reunited with my love of books in 2020 during the infamous pandemic. And I was wondering if it would be worth my while and your time to share with you some of those books that I haven't been able to talk about on my channel because I read them prior to starting my BookTube channel. So I'm just going to do a little scroll through my 2020 and 2021 reads on Goodreads just to travel down memory lane and chat about some of the standout reads that I had those 2 years. Interestingly enough, right before the pandemic hit, I read Legacy and the Queen, which is written by Anne Matthew and the late legendary Kobe Bryant. As you can imagine, I chose to read this book after the tragic death of Kobe Bryant and the passengers of the helicopter that unfortunately and tragically crashed in January of 2020. I believe it was January 26th. And that led me to discover that Kobe Bryant had become an author. And I was really intrigued and ended up really enjoying Legacy and the Queen. It was fantasy and sports combined. We had this young girl who was this aspiring tennis player, but came from modest means and really struggled getting to a place where she could have the resources to fulfill her dreams of playing in this great tennis match. Now, I'm talking to you 4 years later, so I'm doing my best to remember on my own before reading the synopsis. I just remember the characters and the imagery. I thought the imagery was so well done. I love this world that Kobe created. There were so many lessons of perseverance, determination, hard work. The Mamba mentality, basically, was a common thread throughout this book. And I remember being interested in reading more of his books because he has several of them. And I just have yet to pick one up. So maybe I'll do that sooner rather than later. And whew, Lord have mercy. Then I read Educated by Tara Westover. This was a memoir about a woman who grew up in a family that was just, how do I say this? Maybe I should read the synopsis so I don't offend. So she grew up in the mountains of Idaho, and she was born to survivalist. That was the word to describe them. And her father did not believe in medicine, didn't believe in the government. They were basically secluded and had to fend for themselves in every way imaginable. And that sounds like kind of odd. Maybe you would think, well, that's strange. And I'm sure that was quite made for an interesting life. It actually made for an abusive and neglectful life. And I just remember I was constantly in this position as I was reading. I was just like, are you serious? Like, what is happening in this household? It was very deserving of all the accolades and attention that it received, that being the book itself, Educated, and the author. I mean, my goodness. I can't say anything else about it. It was just mind-blowing. Oh, and then I read Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson, and that was because of A. Marie's book club. And it was just a time to escape. I remember being cooped up in the house in 2020 and reading this book, and I just could not stop turning the pages. I couldn't stop smiling. It was so, unrealistic and so bizarre of a premise about this young woman who had gone to this fancy boarding school on scholarship. She ends up taking the heat for something that a wealthy peer of hers did. She took the blame for it so that peer could continue on unscathed at this boarding school. So she, being, I don't remember her name. We're talking about Lillian Madison. So Lillian was the one that had to leave and took the fall for something she didn't do. And Madison was like, oh, how could I ever repay you? they lost touch, but then Madison ends up being married to this governor or this up-and-coming politician who has children from a previous marriage, and these children can self-combust when they're feeling strong emotions. Like, you know how when you say you're fired up? Well, they were literally fired up. And Madison needed a nanny for them. Lillian did it, and it was an interesting time, a wonderful story of found family. It sounds crazy, but I promise you, it's worth the read. It was delightful. And Lord have mercy, then we had Deacon King Kong by James McBride. I still have this book living rent-free in my mind, and we're talking like over 4 years later. A sport coat is the protagonist, and what a quirky older Black gentleman he was. Deacon of his church in New York City. He came from the South, and his wife ended up passing away, and he was just walking around talking to his deceased wife. He could see her. He was like carrying on conversations with her, and what ensued is a comedy of errors. But yet there was some legit, real, like serious topics covered and issues being dealt with in the book, and just so beautifully as well. We were also talking about dealing with different identifiers, different races in the New York City area. We're talking about like Italian families, Black families, Jewish families, and all of them are coming together in very unconventional ways. It was amazing. And I know he's known now for the Heaven and Earth grocery store. I read that book, and I'm telling you guys, in my humble opinion, Deacon King Kong is his best work yet. So I'll let you be the judge. You should pick it up if you haven't already. In January of 2021, I read Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, and it was one of the most poignant books to discuss and unpack enslavement and the impact that it has had on generation upon generation upon generation. We have two siblings, two sisters in West Africa who are separated from each other in a very tragic, horrific way. One of those sisters remains in West Africa. One is married to an Englishman and ends up living a very wealthy, comfortable life, while the other sister ends up becoming enslaved and lives in America. From that enslavement comes generation upon generation of pain, turmoil, trauma. And ultimately how this story unfolds and ends as we're following each generation is simply beautiful, profound, and powerful. Oh my gosh, if you have not read this book yet, you better get your hands on it. And last but not least, we've got Black Buck, baby! Oh my goodness. This book by Mateo Ascariport is amazing. It is something that, unlike anything I had ever read up to that point and anything I've read since. Now, because of that, people have strong opinions one way or the other. I have heard people say they devoured this book, they love this book, they're obsessed with this book, and I've heard people say, what just happened? So I am one of those people that obsessed over that book. I was like screaming out loud, like, what? Huh? What is happening? So I'm trying to remember the main character's name. Darren. How could I forget? Darren is this young Black boy who lives in Bed-Stuy, I believe. He's like in Bed-Stuy in a brownstone with his mother, and he wants more out of his life. He is a smart young man, but he doesn't go to college. He ends up working at a Starbucks in this high rise that has lots of other, businesses and offices within it. So he's serving customers. He's a barista serving customers who are going to these offices. He runs into one guy while serving him that convinces him to take on and apply for a job in his office. And that leads him to this wild, tech startup company. And when I say wild, things just get wild, 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 wild. And did I say wild from there? I was just like constantly confused. But you have this combination of, this young man who's wanting nothing more than to make a better life for himself. He's inspired by his mother to do that. And then he finds himself getting in the rat race of, in the treadmill of achieving at all costs. There's a lot of undercutting, backhanded drama happening in the office. And then he tries to branch out on his own, and then it just gets crazy. Trust me when I say crazy. I know that sounds vague, but you just got to experience it for yourself to know what goes down. This book is amazing, and not to mention the cover is one of my all-time favorite covers. You got this brown hand holding a coffee cup, and you got New York City in the background. I believe it's the Empire State Building. Mateo knew what he was doing, and he has a new book coming out this year that we better get our hands on, folks. Get ready for a wild ride. He is a genius, and I love it. That's all, folks. That's all I've got for you today. Tell me about some of your all-time favorite reads, and let's get specific. Let's talk about 2020, 2021. I feel like that was an interesting time when books kind of resurged and made a comeback. Maybe for some, they never left. But for others, I remember a lot of news stories that were talking about books making a comeback. What were you into back in the day? Let me know. And until next time, happy reading. Bye.